So, this is Buster Chops here, and I'm talking about this interview that the World Health Organization doctor, I believe it's a Canadian doctor, had with some reporter. Many of you have probably seen the video, and I say many of you. I don't know why I'm saying many because nobody's going to watch this video, but if anybody watches this video, you've probably seen this video where this woman interviews the doctor. And if not, I'm going to play a little bit of it right now. So here we go.
WHO considered Taiwan's membership. Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
When Islewood was asked about Taiwan.
Okay, so first of all, he says, I can't hear you. Oh, I couldn't hear the question. So he's stammering there, and obviously he's now responding to her because he can hear her because she's now speaking. So he changes midstream. But also, what goes on after this is very interesting.
He stalled for close to 10 seconds and avoided a reporter's question, but the reporter persisted.
I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
So there you go. So he leans forward and he cuts the thing off. Then when she goes on to talk about it, she asks him about Taiwan again, and he goes on to talk about China. The one thing that really jumps out to me here as well is she says, okay, well, let me ask the question again. And he says, no, that's okay. We'll move on to the next one. But if in fact he hadn't heard the question, he wouldn't say, oh, let's move on to the next one. Because she could just ask him any question. He wouldn't know what the question was. So clearly he has heard the question and he doesn't want to answer it. And that's because he's basically, as being a senior World Health Organization official, he is a bit of a pawn of the Chinese government. Now, this brings me to my greater point, and that is when organizations become obviously corrupted for whatever reason. So if you look at organizations like the United Nations or the World Health Organization that are run or have significant participation by countries that are notorious human rights abusers, and then those notorious human rights abusers get put on the human rights councils or other particular organizations within that body that deal with upholding certain standards to whatever that is, whether it be medical, whether it be social, economic, whatever the case might be. Why don't the countries that are not corrupted, the countries that have some integrity, and I know that number is probably very limited, but why don't those countries simply break off and say, we will no longer be part of this sham? We're going to break off. We're going to form our own organization. Because the thing with organizations is they only have the power that other organizations or individuals give them. So if you have a group of countries that break off and they say, we will no longer be part of the United Nations, and they create some other alliance, the alliance of countries, whatever they want to call it, okay? If suddenly they start doing good work and they recognize themselves and they work within themselves to do a good job, then other countries, other organizations will see that and they will say, well, why am I still with this United Nations and we're getting kind of screwed here when we could go to this other place and be dealt with in legitimate, honorable fashion? So I don't understand why these groups don't do it, why they don't form secondary organizations and ultimately basically say, forget it, we're going to do something our own way. If you have a group like the World Health Organization, why don't other incredibly successful and accomplished doctors break off and form their own health organization, and then they can put out information that they believe is in fact accurate. And they can talk about issues like why Taiwan has been so successful, whereas something like China has not. Because again, that organization, if it's got the cachet of the people behind it, and they put out good information, people will start to notice and people will have to take note of what's going on. So I find it very frustrating, and I find it very confusing as to why this doesn't happen more. Now, obviously, I know that there's a lot involved with setting up all the infrastructure and writing your rules and regulations and all these other things. But it seems like these are bureaucratic organizations. They would just love to do stuff like that because it gives them jobs, and it's a whole lot of make work projects that they could ultimately drag out again and again. But there you go. So long story short, when I see stuff like this guy here who just pretends to not hear a question, he obviously is just ignoring it because China doesn't want to recognize Taiwan as an independent country. They believe that they have rights to it. And Taiwan disagrees. And Taiwan is doing a very good job of preventing the spread of the coronavirus. When he's ignoring it just because his Chinese masters would be upset at him, or there's an edict that has come down that they are not allowed to do so, it drives me crazy. Again, it's people putting political interests over the interests of the people that they're supposed to be serving.